The Marrakesh sun descended like golden honey over the red walls of Al-Rashid Palace when Sophia Mitchell uttered the 4 words that would forever transform 3 lives, a $750 million business deal, and shatter every rule about power, worth, and human dignity that the world's richest men thought they understood. But to grasp the devastating power of those simple words, which rang like thunder in an apparently serene sky, we need to go back 15 days in time, when it all began with a look that defied decades of social conditioning. 15 days earlier, Dallas, Texas. The mirror in Sophia Mitchell's walk-in closet reflected a truth she had learned to carry like an invisible cross. At 29, she possessed emerald green eyes that could stop traffic, golden hair that waved like silk in the wind, and porcelain skin that beauty magazines would kill to photograph. But all of this was framed by a body that the world, and especially her husband's world, considered a fundamental mistake. Sophia was obese, not curvy or plus size in the politically correct terms people whispered with pity in their eyes. She was genuinely, visibly, undeniably obese. And in 10 years of marriage to Brandon Mitchell, heir to Mitchell Industries, she had learned that her existence was a continuous improvement project that never reached the desired result. "Soph, are you ready?" Brandon's voice echoed from downstairs, carrying that familiar note of barely disguised impatience. "The Gulf Stream is waiting, and you know how Sheikh Ammar values punctuality." She adjusted for the 5th time the black blazer that supposedly minimized her figure, one of dozens of pieces in her wardrobe, carefully selected by what Brandon gently called her image consultant. Each outfit was armor, each choice an attempt to make herself smaller, less noticeable, less herself. "Coming down now," she replied, her voice soft as always, trained not to make waves. Brandon was in the entrance hall, impeccable in his $15,000 Armani suit, fingers drumming on his Rolex Daytona, while reviewing emails on his iPhone. He looked up when she appeared at the top of the stairway, and that look, which she knew so well, swept over her quickly. It wasn't malicious. It was worse. It was evaluative, clinical, like a logistics manager checking if the problematic cargo was adequately packaged for transport. "You look fine," he said, which in Mitchell language meant acceptable for limited public exposure. "Remember, honey, Sheikh Ammar is very traditional, conservative Arab, you know how it is. Just be discreet during the meetings, okay? Let me handle the business." Be discreet. The words pierced her like familiar needles. In 10 years, she had become an expert at being discreet. Discreet in how she sat, always sideways, always with hands strategically crossed. Discreet in how she ate, small portions, slow chewing, never seconds. Discreet in how she existed, photo corners, silent, smiles, presence that could be easily edited or ignored. "Of course," she replied, clutching the book she carried like a talisman, a first edition of the Arabian Nights she had bought at a used bookstore years ago. It was her only silent rebellion, her escape portal to a world where a woman's intelligence could save kingdoms and transform tyrants into wise men. On the way to the airport, Brandon did what he always did when nervous, turned everything into a business presentation. "This deal with the Al-Rashids is crucial, Soph. It's not just about the initial $200 million for phosphate rights. It's about establishing our presence in North Africa. Dad always said the Hunt family's great deals started with Middle Eastern connections in the 70s. He paused, looking at her through the rearview mirror. "Sheikh Ammar probably won't even notice you. These traditional Arabs, you know, they have very specific ideas about how women should be." The phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sophia felt the familiar weight of invisibility settling on her shoulders. She would be the decorative wife who didn't decorate, the companion who needed excuses, the elephant in the room everyone would pretend not to see. But as the Gulf Stream cut through the sky toward Morocco, something strange happened. Sophia began to dream, not of weight loss or magical transformations, but of the stories she had read 1,000 times. Scheherazade, who saved her own life and those of 1,000 other women through the pure force of her mind. Historical Arab women who ruled through diplomacy and wisdom. Queens who were respected for their presence, not despite it. If only there existed a place in the world where a woman like me would be seen as something beyond a failed project, she thought, watching the Atlas Mountains appear on the horizon like dragon teeth against the orange sky. She had no idea she was about to discover that such a place really existed. Al-Rashid Palace emerged from the landscape like a vision from a fairy tale, but a fairy tale written by someone who understood that true magnificence comes from history, not show business. 47 rooms spread across 15 hectares of gardens where Damascus roses competed with jasmine in an olfactory symphony that made the air seem solid with perfume. Sheikh Ammar Al-Rashid waited at the main entrance, and the first thing Sophia noticed was that he didn't seem to be posing. At 42, he had the natural presence of someone, accustomed to real power, not performative power. His black hair with silver threads at the temples framed a face that could have been sculpted by Arab masters, angular, masculine, but with eyes that suggested genuine intellectual depth. He greeted Brandon with the protocol smile powerful men reserve for potential business partners. Firm, warm, but calculated. "Mr. Mitchell, welcome to my home. Was the trip smooth?" "Perfect, Sheikh. I can't wait to discuss our proposals." Brandon was already entering presentation mode when Sophia emerged from the car. And then it happened. Sheikh Ammar Al-Rashid, a man who had dined with kings and negotiated with presidents, who controlled a $12 billion fortune and had met some of the most beautiful women in the world, simply stopped functioning. It wasn't her facial beauty that struck him first, though the emerald green eyes were indeed hypnotizing. It wasn't her education or elegance, which he hadn't yet witnessed. It was something more, primitive and deep, her presence. Sophia Mitchell moved like a queen, not a Western queen, nervous about her own authority, but like the matriarchs of his own culture, women who commanded respect through the force of their personality, who occupied space as a natural right, not an excuse. She was abundant in the way his ancestors valued, prosperous, fertile, powerful. In his culture, Sophia wouldn't be seen as obese. She would be seen as magnificent. And this, Brandon made a vague gesture in her direction, as if presenting luggage that needed to be quickly explained, is my wife, Sophia. The introduction was so casual, so dismissive, that Sheikh Ammar felt a stab of something that took him a moment to recognize: anger. This man was presenting a work of art as if it were a logistics problem. "Mrs. Mitchell," Sheikh Ammar said, and his voice was completely different from the one he had used with Brandon. It was deeper, loaded with respect, that made Sophia blink in surprise. He extended his hand, and when their fingers touched, the contact was firm, warm, and lasted 3 seconds longer than social protocol required. "It is an extraordinary honor to receive you in our home," he continued, and there was something in his intonation that made it sound less like politeness and more like truth. Sophia felt her face warm. When was the last time someone had used the word honor in connection with her presence? When was the last time someone had looked directly into her eyes, without the quick, embarrassed diversion she knew so well? "The pleasure is mine, Sheikh Ammar," she replied, her voice naturally soft but carrying a dignity that surprised her. "Your palace is stunning. It seems to have come from the Arabian Nights," he finished, noticing the book in her hands. His eyes lit up with genuine interest. "A reader of Arabic classics. How fascinating." Brandon, completely oblivious to the electric current that had just passed between his wife and the most powerful man in North Africa, clapped his hands impatiently. "Fantastic. Sheikh, we brought updated projections for the mining rights, and I believe when you see our projected growth numbers—" "Business can wait, my friend," Sheikh Ammar interrupted, but his eyes remained fixed on Sophia. "A long journey deserves adequate rest, and hospitality is sacred in our culture. Let me show you your accommodations personally." As they walked through marble corridors adorned with centuries of Islamic art, Brandon marched ahead like an eager general, talking about transportation logistics and exchange rates. Sophia came behind, trying to make herself small as she always did, but Sheikh Ammar deliberately slowed his pace to walk beside her. "These tiles," he said, indicating a particularly elaborate wall, "tell the story of our founder, the first woman of the Al-Rashid dynasty." Sophia stopped, studying the intricate patterns. "It's the story of Scheherazade," she murmured, recognizing the motifs even through artistic interpretations. "But not the Western romantic version. This is about the political power of her intelligence." Sheikh Ammar stopped completely, genuinely stunned. You know, the historical interpretation of the Arabian Nights. Not just the Disney versions, but the academic texts. Sophia blushed, automatically preparing for the embarrassment that always came when she demonstrated any knowledge Brandon considered showing off. It's been my field of interest since college. I've always been fascinated by how Scheherazade used narrative as a political tool, transforming a tyrant through gradual education. Extraordinary, Sheikh Ammar breathed, and for the first time in years, Sophia heard genuine admiration in a man's voice. In a single observation, you've demonstrated more understanding of our cultural heritage than most Western diplomats show in entire careers. Brandon turned around, noticing that attention had shifted away from him. What? Oh yes. Sophia has interesting hobbies. She was always good with books. Anyway, Sheikh, about the technical specifications of the phosphate. The light in Sophia's eyes instantly dimmed, like a candle being blown out. Sheikh Ammar saw the transformation and felt something twist in his chest. Hobbies. This idiot called his wife's exceptional intelligence a hobby, and worse, she was clearly used to it. This man, Ammar thought with growing anger, has a priceless treasure in his hands and treats it like a stone that needs polishing. That night, dinner was served on the main terrace overlooking gardens illuminated by thousands of small lights that made the palace look like an earthly constellation. Brandon had subtly tried to position Sophia at the end of the long table, away from the center of action, but Sheikh Ammar insisted she sit to his right, the position of honor traditionally reserved for the most respected guest. Sophia, Sheikh Ammar said, completely ignoring Brandon's conversation. About export logistics, tell me what about our culture attracts you? Not just the tourist aspects, but the deeper social structures. Her eyes lit up as Ammar had hoped. It was like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. The complexity of power relationships, she began, then hesitated, glancing at Brandon. But Sheikh Ammar nodded encouragingly, so she continued. In classical Arab culture, female power wasn't exercised through direct confrontation, but through influence over family and community networks. Women like Khadija, the Prophet's first wife, were powerful businesswomen. Harun al-Rashid's mother, Kaizuran, was essentially the regent of the caliphate. Brandon cleared his throat loudly, a warning signal Sophia knew well. Honey, I'm sure Sheikh Ammar isn't interested in history lectures. On the contrary, Sheikh Ammar said, his voice carrying an authority that made Brandon lean back in his chair. I am absolutely fascinated. Please continue, Mrs. Mitchell. Well, Sophia said, gaining confidence for the first time in years, I've always been impressed by how Arab women historically managed to exercise real power in apparently patriarchal societies. They understood that lasting influence comes from building alliances, managing resources, and educating the next generations. It's power through wisdom, not through force. Sheikh Ammar set down his fork, completely absorbed. And how does this compare to modern Western power structures? It's fascinating. Sophia became animated, completely forgetting her usual self-consciousness. In the West, we tend to value direct and visible power, CEOs, politicians, celebrities. But historically, Arab female power was more subtle, and I would argue more effective in the long term. A matriarch who raised future leaders had more influence than any general. That's exactly... Brandon started to interrupt, but Sheikh Ammar cut him off with an icy look. Your wife is offering insights that our universities would pay fortunes to obtain, Mr. Mitchell. Perhaps we should listen. Dinner continued this way, with Sheikh Ammar asking increasingly sophisticated questions and Sophia responding with articulation and knowledge that left even the Sheikh's own servants pausing to listen. She discussed Persian poetry, Islamic architecture, the influence of trade routes on Sufi philosophy, and the complexities of medieval Islamic jurisprudence. Brandon became increasingly irritated, realizing he had become a spectator at his own business meeting. But Sheikh Ammar seemed genuinely enchanted, making mental notes of every word. When Sophia casually mentioned that she had studied classical Arabic in university, just as a hobby, Sheikh Ammar nearly choked on his wine. You speak Arabic? A little, she said modestly, mainly to be able to read original texts. Sheikh Ammar said something in Arabic, a complex phrase about hospitality and honor. Sophia responded fluently, quoting a verse of classical poetry. The sheikh was silent for a long moment, then began to laugh, a rich, genuine sound. "My friends," he said, addressing the entire table but looking directly at Sophia, "in 20 years of international business, I have never met a Westerner who quoted Ibn Arabi at the dinner table." Brandon forced a laugh. "Yes, well, Sophia has always been academic, but getting back to business, Sheikh." "Actually," Sheikh Ammar said, his voice becoming more formal, "I would like to revise our initial proposal." Brandon perked up. "Of course, we're open to adjustment." 250 million, Sheikh Ammar said simply. Brandon nearly choked. "Excuse me? Your initial proposal was $150 million for mining rights. I'm offering $250 million, with one condition." Sophia's heart began beating faster. There was something in his tone. "I would like Mrs. Mitchell to be present at all future business negotiations as our official cultural consultant." The silence at the table was absolute. Brandon looked at his wife as if she had just transformed into a completely different person. Cultural consultant? Sophia? The woman he had spent 10 years trying to keep invisible at social functions. "I don't understand," Brandon stammered. "It's simple," Sheikh Ammar explained, but his eyes remained on Sophia. "Commercial operations in our region require sophisticated cultural understanding. Your wife demonstrated tonight that she possesses this understanding at a level we rarely encounter. It would be invaluable to us." Sophia felt the world spinning around her. Invaluable, a word that had never been associated with her. She had always been problematic, challenging, a work in progress, never invaluable. "Naturally," Sheikh Ammar continued, "this would require her to remain here for several weeks for the complete negotiations." And there it was, the first bait, cast with the skill of a master fisherman. Brandon, still trying to process that his offer had just increased by $100 million, nodded automatically. Of course, if Sophia can be useful. Sophia almost laughed at the irony. After a decade of being useless, suddenly she had become useful, and the most powerful man she had ever met was looking at her as if she were the most interesting person in the room. But even as she felt a dizzying excitement at finally being seen, a small voice in her mind whispered a warning. Sheikh Ammar Al-Rashid wasn't known for his charity, and men like him didn't offer $100 million increases for cultural consulting. There was something more happening here, something she couldn't quite identify yet. But for what she felt that night, for the first time in years being treated like an intelligent and valuable person, she almost didn't care. Almost. The next 3 days established a pattern that was as subtle as it was dangerous. Officially, they were in business meetings. In reality, Sheikh Ammar was conducting the most sophisticated seduction campaign Sophia had ever witnessed, and the most terrible thing was that it wasn't even directed at her body. He was seducing her mind. Every morning, Brandon locked himself away with the Sheikh's lawyers and accountants, diving into spreadsheets and contracts. And every morning, Sheikh Ammar appeared with an excuse to show Sophia aspects of local culture that would be relevant to the negotiations. On the second day, he took her to his private library, a room that made Sophia gasp audibly. 3 floors of rare manuscripts, first editions, and texts in 12 different languages. There were works by Ibn Sina that European universities would kill to examine, poetry by Al-Mutanabi on original parchments, and an entire section dedicated to writings by historical Arab women that most Western academics didn't even know existed. "My God," Sophia whispered, running her trembling fingers along the shelves. This is one of the most important collections in the world. And you are one of the few people I've met who can truly appreciate it," Sheikh Ammar replied, standing close enough for her to feel the warmth of his body. "Sophia, may I ask a personal question?" She nodded, still hypnotized by the library. "Why did you stop studying formally? Brandon mentioned you never pursued graduate school, but it's obvious you have passion and talent for academic research." The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had applied to graduate school 3 years ago. Harvard, Princeton, Columbia. She had been accepted to all of them. But when she told Brandon, he said it would be better for me to focus on supporting his career, she admitted, her voice almost a whisper. That 2 people focused on studies in the family would be impractical. Sheikh Ammar was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a controlled anger that made her look at him. "He asked you to give up Harvard to support his career." It wasn't quite like that. It was exactly like that. He turned to face her completely. Sophia, in my culture, a woman with your intelligence would be encouraged to lead a university, not give it up to organize business dinners. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. That afternoon during lunch, Sheikh Ammar made his next move. "Mr. Mitchell," he said casually, cutting lamb with surgical precision, "I've been thinking about our partnership. What if we expanded beyond mining?" Brandon leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Expand how?" "Textile operations in North Africa, distribution rights in 6 countries, perhaps 400 million. Sophia saw Brandon's expression change. $400 million. It was more money than the Mitchell family had made in 3 generations combined. "That would be extraordinary," Brandon said, but there was a note of confusion in his voice. "But Sheikh, why the sudden generosity? Not that I'm complaining, but..." "Simple," Sheikh Ammar smiled, but his eyes went to Sophia. "I believe certain partnerships transcend mere business. When we find people who truly understand our culture, our values, well, that's priceless." The way he said people, singular, feminine, wasn't lost on Sophia. Her stomach gave a twist she couldn't identify as fear or excitement. Brandon, however, was too busy doing mental calculations to notice the subtleties. "Sheikh, this would completely change our position in the global market." "Exactly," Sheikh Ammar agreed, "but a partnership of this magnitude would require intimacy, deep trust, time to build genuine bonds between our families." He paused, letting the words settle. "Perhaps Sophia could remain here for a month, as our resident cultural consultant. Naturally, you would be welcome for frequent visits, Mr. Mitchell, but someone would need to be here continuously to ensure we understand all the cultural nuances." And there it was, the real proposal, wrapped in business language but loaded with intent. Sophia felt her blood freeze. He was asking her to stay, alone, for a month. "A month is a long time," she said carefully. "For $400 million, Brandon said before she could continue. "Soph, this would secure our future for generations." The fact that he hadn't even asked how she felt about staying a month in Morocco wasn't lost on any of the 3 at the table. "Naturally," Sheikh Ammar said softly, but with authority, "the decision is entirely Sophia's. We wouldn't do anything that would make her uncomfortable." But his eyes, when they met hers, told a different story. They said, "I want you here. I want you close. I want time to show you how a woman like you should be treated." And for the first time in her adult life, Sophia found herself considering what it would mean to be desired by a man who saw her mind as a treasure instead of seeing her as a renovation project. That night, alone in the guest room that was larger than her entire house in Dallas, Sophia lay awake staring at the ornate ceiling. Through the open windows, the scent of night-blooming jasmine mixed with the distant sound of Arabic music from the gardens. She knew she was being courted. The question was, did she care? And more frighteningly, was she beginning to enjoy it? 3 doors down, Brandon was awake too, but for completely different reasons. $400 million. The board of directors would treat him like a god. His father would finally stop comparing him unfavorably to the great negotiators of previous generations. All he had to do was let Sophia stay for a month, in a palace, being treated like royalty, doing work she obviously loved. What was the real problem with that? And if Sheikh Ammar was interested in her, well, Sophia was an intelligent adult woman. She could take care of herself. It wasn't like he was really selling her, right? Right? The 4th day began with a formal meeting in Sheikh Ammar's main office, a room that looked more like a museum of power than an office. 15th century tapestries adorned marble walls, and an ebony desk older than the United States dominated the center of the room. Brandon arrived armed with contracts, projections, and the confidence of a man who thought he was finally controlling the situation. Sophia arrived with her book and a growing sense that she was about to discover something that would change everything. "My friends," Sheikh Ammar began, and there was something different in his tone, more formal, more definitive. "Today, let's be completely honest with each other." He pressed a button on his desk, and a servant entered carrying a velvet case. Sheikh Ammar opened it to reveal a necklace that made Sophia lose her breath. Emeralds the size of coins, each perfectly cut and surrounded by diamonds that captured light like little stars. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and obviously worth more than luxury cars. "This necklace," Sheikh Ammar said, lifting it reverently, "belonged to my great-great-grandmother, Sultana Amira Al-Rashid. She was one of the most powerful women of her time. She negotiated between 5 countries, established universities, and created a dynasty that lasted 200 years. He stood and walked toward Sophia. "It has been worn by only 4 women in my family's history. Each of them changed the course of our destiny." Brandon watched, confused, as Sheikh Ammar stopped, directly in front of his wife. "Sophia, I would like you to wear it." "I can't," she whispered. "It's too precious, too. It's exactly what a woman like you should wear," he said firmly. "Allow me." With surprisingly gentle hands, he placed the necklace around her neck. The emeralds settled against her collarbone as if they had been made for her, and somehow they transformed her. Under those historical jewels, Sophia didn't look like an obese woman trying to hide. She looked like an empress. "Perfect," Sheikh Ammar murmured, standing close enough for her to feel his breath. "Exactly as I imagined." Brandon began to feel the first premonition that something was fundamentally wrong. "Sheikh, this is very generous, but—" "Mr. Mitchell," Sheikh Ammar interrupted, returning to his chair but keeping his eyes on Sophia. "The time has come for complete honesty. The mining deal, the expansions, the 400 million, none of it was really about business." The silence in the room became so thick, Sophia could hear her own heart beating against the emeralds on her chest. "What do you mean?" Brandon asked, his voice already carrying a note of panic. Sheikh Ammar leaned back in his chair, his fingers interlaced with the calm of a predator who had finally decided to reveal his true intentions. "I mean that from the moment I saw your wife get out of that car 5 days ago, I knew I had to have her. The mining business was just, let's say, a creative way to buy time to get to know her better." Sophia felt as if the ground had disappeared under her feet. "Sheikh Ammar, let me finish," he said gently, but with authority. "In my culture, Sophia, when a man sees a woman he recognizes as his destined soulmate, he doesn't hesitate. He acts. And you—" He paused, his eyes traveling over her with an intensity that made her tremble. "You are the most magnificent woman I have ever met." Brandon jumped from his chair. "Wait a minute. Are you saying this whole business was a sham to get to my wife?" "Not a sham," Sheikh Ammar corrected calmly. "An investment. In your Western world, you court with dinners and flowers. In my world, we demonstrate seriousness of intentions through actions of magnitude. $400 million is my way of showing I'm not playing games." Sophia felt nausea rising in her throat. You're buying me." "I'm offering," Sheikh Ammar said, his voice becoming softer, more persuasive. "Sophia, in my culture, a woman like you wouldn't be hidden. You would be celebrated. You would be a matriarch, a queen. You would have power, influence, respect." He stood and walked to the window, gesturing to the extensive gardens. "See those gardens? That library? All of it would be yours. You would have your own university to run, your own cultural foundation to manage. You would never again be treated as a burden or an improvement project." The words hit Sophia like bullets, each one finding a painful target in her wounded soul. And Sheikh Ammar continued, turning to look directly at Brandon. "I am prepared to make this transition financially comfortable for everyone involved." "Transition?" Brandon repeated weakly. "Divorce," Sheikh Ammar said the word as if he were discussing the weather. $100 million, Mr. Mitchell, in exchange for papers that would allow Sophia to choose her own future. The number hung in the air like a bomb. $100 million for signing divorce papers. Brandon opened and closed his mouth several times, looking like a fish out of water. Sophia watched, horrified, as she saw calculations happening behind her husband's eyes. "You're offering me $100 million to sell my wife," Brandon finally managed to say. "I'm offering $100 million to stop wasting an extraordinary woman's time," Sheikh Ammar replied coldly. "Sophia, in 5 days here, has demonstrated more intelligence, grace, and dignity than most people show in a lifetime, and you treat her like a social inconvenience." He walked to where Sophia sat, still stunned. "But the decision isn't yours, Mr. Mitchell, nor mine. It's hers." Sheikh Ammar knelt beside Sophia's chair, taking her hands in his. "Sophia, I'm offering you a life where you never again have to apologize for existing, where your intelligence will be valued, not hidden, where you will be seen as the queen you were always destined to be." His voice became more intimate, more urgent. "But more than that, I'm offering true love, not the kind of love that tolerates, but the kind that celebrates, not the kind that accepts, but the kind that adores." Sophia looked at Brandon, who stood like a statue, clearly struggling with the emotional mathematics of losing a wife versus gaining $100 million. "Brandon," she said softly, "say something." Brandon looked at her, then at Sheikh Ammar, then back at her. When he spoke, his voice was strange, distant. $100 million is a lot of money, Soph." The words fell like a death sentence. Not never, not you're crazy, not my wife is not for sale, just an observation about the amount. Sophia felt something break inside her, not her heart, but something deeper, her faith that in the end, Brandon loved her enough to fight for her. "You're considering this," she said, not a question, but a stunned statement. I just," Brandon stammered, but couldn't finish the sentence. Sheikh Ammar watched this exchange with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness for Sophia. He had bet correctly on Brandon Mitchell's character, but he took no pleasure in being right. "Sophia," Sheikh Ammar said gently, "you don't need to decide now, but I would like you to know, my offer isn't just about taking you away from a bad situation, it's about putting you where you should have always been." He stood, returning to his desk. "I have to travel to Dubai tomorrow night for urgent business. If you decide to come with me, it will be as my fiancé. If you decide to stay, I will respect your choice completely. But either way, I will never again accept seeing you treated as less than the royalty you are." Brandon found his voice. "And if she chooses to stay with me?" Sheikh Ammar looked at him with an expression that could have melted metal. "Then you will have been given a second chance you don't deserve. And if you're smart, you'll spend the rest of your life proving you've learned to value what you almost lost." That night, Sophia sat alone in her room, still wearing the emerald necklace because Sheikh Ammar had insisted she keep it, regardless of her decision. The jewels were heavy against her skin, constantly reminding her of the weight of the choice she faced. 3 soft knocks on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Brandon, looking older than she had seen him in years. "Can I come in?" She nodded, and he sat in the chair beside the bed, avoiding her gaze. "Sophia, we need to talk about this." "About what, Brandon?" "About how much I'm worth on the open market." He winced. "It's not like that, isn't it?" She turned to face him completely. "Brandon, a man offered $100 million for me, and you didn't immediately say no. You calculated." "I was in shock." "You were interested," she corrected. "I saw your eyes, Brandon. You were doing math." He was silent for a long moment. $100 million would change everything for us, Soph. Think about what we could do. "Us?" Sophia laughed, a sound without humor. "Brandon, if you accept this money, there won't be an us anymore. That's kind of the point. But what if—" He stopped, realizing how terrible what he was about to say sounded. "What if what? What if I went with him for a while and then came back? What if we treated this like a temporary lease?" Sophia shook her head, disgusted. "Are you really suggesting I be the most expensive prostitute in history? That's not it. I just—" Brandon ran, his hands through his hair, frustrated. "Sophia, you saw how he looks at you, how he talks to you. Maybe you would be happier." The admission hung between them like a confession. "Happier than with you?" she asked softly. Brandon couldn't meet her eyes. "You've been unhappy for years, Soph, I know that. You think I don't notice, but I do. And I don't know how to fix it." It was the most honest thing he had said in years, and somehow it hurt more than all the rest. "Brandon," Sophia said gently, "when was the last time you told me I was beautiful?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't remember. "When was the last time you asked about my dreams, my fears? Anything about me that didn't involve how I could better support your career?" Again, silence. "Sheikh Ammar has known me for 5 days, and he knows more about who I really am than you do after 10 years of marriage." The cruel truth hung between them. "I can change," Brandon said desperately. "We can go to couples therapy. I can learn to be better." "You can," Sophia agreed. "But you should. Not because you're about to lose me to another man, but because I'm your wife, and I deserve better." She stood, walking to the balcony that overlooked the illuminated gardens. The saddest thing, Brandon, is that Sheikh Ammar is right. I have been unhappy for years, and you've been part of the reason. Brandon felt tears stinging his eyes. Sophia, please. But he's also wrong about something, she continued without turning around. He thinks he can buy me, that he can save me, that I need another man to give me value. She finally turned to look at him. The truth is that neither of you understands. My value doesn't come from you loving me or him desiring me. My value is mine. It always has been. The final meeting took place in the palace's main garden, under a pergola covered with jasmine that perfumed the morning air with an almost intoxicating sweetness. Sheikh Ammar had arranged an elaborate table with Arabic coffee, fresh fruits and pastries that looked like small works of art. But no one had an appetite. Brandon arrived first, wearing his best suit, but looking like a man on his way to his own execution. Sheikh Ammar came next, imposing in his traditional white robe, carrying a leather portfolio that obviously contained the final papers. Sophia was the last to arrive, and when she appeared, both men fell silent. She was wearing a simple white linen dress she had bought at a local boutique the day before. Nothing fancy, nothing designed to hide or diminish, just a beautiful dress that made her feel like herself. She still wore the emerald necklace, but somehow on her, the jewels looked less like a gift and more like a crown she had claimed by right. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and calm, "I believe we have some final matters to resolve." Sheikh Ammar stood respectfully. "Sophia, I hope you slept well. I know it was a difficult night of reflection." "I slept perfectly," she lied, "and I spent a lot of time thinking about both of your proposals." Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "Soph, about last night." "Let me finish," she said firmly. "You've both made very generous offers. Sheikh Ammar, you offered me a life of luxury, respect, and love. Brandon, you offered me, well, you considered selling me for $100 million. The brutality of the statement made Brandon wince. But before I give my answer, I want both of you to understand something fundamental that you seem to have missed in your negotiations." Sophia walked to the table, placing her hands on the cold marble. "I am not property to be bought, sold, or transferred. I'm not a prize to be won or a problem to be solved. I am a complete person, with my own value, my own dreams, and my own power." She turned to Sheikh Ammar first. "Sheikh Ammar, you saw me when others didn't. You valued me when others didn't. And for that, I am genuinely grateful. But your proposal, however generous, is still based on the premise that I need a man to save me, that my value comes from being desired by you." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he remained silent. "You want to give me a palace, but you didn't ask if I want a palace. You assumed that because I'm not happy with my current life, I would automatically want the life you're offering." She paused, letting the words settle. "And you, Brandon," she turned to her husband, "spent 10 years treating me like a failed improvement project, and when another man offered me value, you immediately started calculating how much I might be worth in money." Brandon opened his mouth to protest, but she raised a hand. "So here's my decision, my choice, based on what I want, not on what you want from me." The garden became so quiet that the only sound was the distant murmur of water running in hidden fountains. Sophia reached for the leather portfolio Sheikh Ammar had brought and opened it, revealing 2 sets of papers. An elaborate marriage agreement and divorce papers already prepared. She took the divorce papers and a pen. "I accept the divorce," she said, signing with a steady hand. Brandon made a sound that might have been a sob. "But," she continued, turning to Sheikh Ammar, "I reject your marriage proposal." Now it was the Sheikh's turn to be stunned. "I reject it because I don't want to trade one cage for another, even if the new one is made of gold. I reject it because I deserve a man who sees me as a partner, not as a conquest." She paused, gathering courage for the hardest part. "However, I accept your job offer. I would like to run your cultural foundation, but on my terms, as an employee, not as property, as an independent consultant who works with you, not for you." Sheikh Ammar tilted his head slightly. "And if I say the job was just an excuse to have you close, then you'd be lying," Sophia replied calmly. "Because I saw how your eyes lit up when I talked about cultural preservation. I saw your genuine passion for the educational projects you keep in your desk drawers. You need someone with my background, Sheikh. The question is whether your ego can handle having me as a professional partner instead of a personal trophy." A slow smile spread across Sheikh Ammar's face. "Sophia Mitchell, you truly are extraordinary." "Sophia Chen," she corrected. "I'm going back to my maiden name." She turned to Brandon, who was looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Brandon, I hope you find someone who can love you the way you need to be loved, and I hope you learn to love someone the way she deserves to be loved. But that person isn't me." "Sophia," Brandon said, his voice breaking, "I'm sorry for everything. You're right about me, about us, about everything." "I know," she said gently, "and that's why I'm freeing you to become the man you could be instead of continuing to be the man you've been." She turned to include both men in her final gaze. "Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give someone is to show them what's possible. Sheikh Ammar, you showed me that I can be valued. Brandon, you showed me that I deserve better. And now, I'm going to show both of you what a woman can do when she finally decides to value herself." With that, she walked toward the palace, the morning sun illuminating her golden hair and making the emeralds at her throat shine like little stars. The article on the front page of the International Journal of Cultural Anthropology was titled, "Lost Voices, Rediscovering the Intellectual Contributions of Medieval Arab Women" by Dr. Sophia Chen, director of the Al-Rashid Foundation for Cultural Preservation. Sophia was sitting in her office in Casablanca, not a palace, but a modern building overlooking the ocean, when her assistant brought her the journal. She smiled, unconsciously touching the emerald necklace she still wore daily, now not as a symbol of possession, but as a reminder that she had chosen her own worth. Her phone rang. It was Sheikh Ammar. "Dr. Chen." His voice through the speaker carried a warm formality that had developed between them. "I saw the article. Congratulations. Is Harvard interested in your findings?" "Very much so," she laughed. "Ironic that now that I no longer need academic validation, it's being offered freely. Perhaps because now you're doing the work for the work itself, not to prove something to someone." It was an insightful observation, and she appreciated that he knew her well enough to make it. "Sheikh, may I ask something personal?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Not having insisted more?" He laughed, a genuinely amused sound. "Sophia, you've become one of the most important people in my life. Not as a wife I would own, but as a friend I choose to have. That's worth more than any romantic fantasy I might have had." He paused. "Besides, you were right. I wanted to conquer you, not love you. I've learned the difference." After they hung up, Sophia leaned back in her chair, looking at the stacks of manuscripts on her desk. Real projects, meaningful work, discoveries that were changing how the world viewed women's historical contributions. Her other phone rang. She hesitated when she saw the name. "Brandon." "Hi, Soph." His voice sounded different, softer, more humble. "Brandon, how are you?" "Better. In therapy, like you suggested." "Alone, not couples." He laughed bitterly. "Finding out I have a lot of work to do on myself before trying to be with anyone. That's in growth." "Yeah, painful, but necessary." He paused. "Sophia, I read your article. I'm proud of you. I should have said that more often. Thank you. And I wanted you to know. I'll never treat a woman the way I treated you again. You taught me that real love means celebrating someone, not trying to change them." After the call, Sophia sat in silence for a moment, then returned to the manuscripts on her desk. There was so much work to do, so many lost voices to rediscover, so many stories to tell about women who had refused to accept the limitations the world placed on them. She smiled, picking up her pen. After all, she had a tradition to continue. Like Scheherazade 1,000 years before her, Sophia had discovered that the most powerful women are not those who are chosen by men, but those who choose themselves. And in choosing her own worth, she had found something more precious than all the palaces or all the million-dollar deals in the world. She had found her own voice. And now finally the world was listening. Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't being seen as valuable by others, but seeing yourself as priceless through your own eyes. And once a woman discovers her own worth, no price in the world can buy her. But stories like this only make a difference when they're shared, when they reach that person who needs to hear exactly these words today. If this story touched you, if it awakened something you haven't felt in a long time, or if you know someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth, help me spread it. Leave your like, it shows me that stories like this matter. Subscribe to the channel for more narratives that celebrate human strength, and share it. Because somewhere, someone is waiting to hear that they're worth more than they imagine. Until the next story that will touch your heart, you're worth more than you know.